Hi folks, in this Rambles with Robin and Ruby video, we leave Rennie Brunel Provincial Park and drive north from the town of Kapuskasing to the end of the Summer Road, where the Kipling Hydroelectric generating station is located on the Mattagami River. Along the drive, we see how the boreal forest composition changes when the geological substrate changes. We see how geology influences the location of a long segment of the road. We see some small kettle lakes that were created by geological processes at the end of the Ice Age, and we see some flowering plants that were in bloom. We're headed to this area for two reasons. First, I have never driven in this area, so there is an appeal to see the northern landscape. Secondly, I wanted to geobotanize in the area of this northern forest, close to the southern limit of the James Bay lowland. The drive is not long. It was about 85 kilometers or 50 miles. We will drive through boreal forest. Now, some of you may not have seen or set foot in the boreal forest before. So, for that reason, I'll start with a few interesting facts about the boreal forest. Did you know that the boreal forest is the world's largest intact forest ecosystem? In Canada, the boreal forest stretches from Yukon to Newfoundland and Labrador and encompasses about 1.2 billion acres, or 485 million hectares of northern Canada. That amounts to about 55% of Canada's landmass and about 2/3 of the land we call Ontario. That's a lot of boreal forest. The boreal forest represents about 25% of the world's remaining intact forest, even more than the Amazon rainforest. The boreal forest contains about 25% of the world's wetlands and includes more surface freshwater, about 200 million acres, or 81 million hectares, than anywhere else on Earth. The number of freshwater lakes is really obvious on this photo, which I composed while flying over the boreal forest in winter, when the lake stood out because of ice cover. The boreal forest is also home to about 300 bird species and the iconic woodland caribou. I have not seen woodland caribou very often in my career, but this one I photographed in the northern Rocky Mountains of British Columbia on the Liard Plateau back in July 24, 2019. Across Canada, the boreal forest is home to hundreds of Indigenous communities. One example is the remote Fly-In First Nation community of Fort Hope, in the homeland of Admatong First Nation, north of Thunder Bay, Ontario. In Ontario, the boreal forest is the land addressed by Treaty 9, which is also known as the James Bay Treaty, that was signed by Canada and Indigenous peoples in 1905 and 1906, with adhesions in 1929 and 1930. Now, I am not an ecologist, so I have referenced the excellent Ontario government publication entitled Ecosystems of Ontario, Part 1, Ecozones and Ecoregions. The authors of this publication describe the ecoregions of Ontario. Also, I will use the term ecotone, which is the transition between two biological communities, where the two communities meet and integrate. My destination area at the end of the road lies at one such ecotone, or boundary between the James Bay ecoregion, labeled 2E on this simple map, and the Lake Abitibi ecoregion, labeled 3E on this map. The geology of the destination area is quite interesting. Geologically, the boreal forest in Ontario sits on top of the Canadian Shield, which is the ancient core of the North American continent. The Canadian Shield is made up of rocks 1,000 to 3,000 million years old. That's pretty old. This cartoon shows the location of the Canadian Shield across Canada. On this geological map cartoon of Ontario, the Canadian Shield rocks are colored pink, green, yellow, and brown. Those rocks are overlain by a blanket of much younger limestone and dolostone rocks that are preserved in the Hudson Bay and James Bay lowland areas, and in southern Ontario. Those blanket rocks are about 300 to 500 million years old and are colored gray on the cartoon geological map. Now, during the last ice age, which peaked about 25,000 years ago, all of Ontario was covered by an ice sheet called the Laurentide ice sheet. The Laurentide ice sheet, or glacier, ground away the rocks and deposited that material as glacial deposits of till, sand, gravel, and clay on top of the bedrock. I'll share more about the geological deposits later in this video. because the Laurentide ice sheet shaped the land surface and created many different landforms and habitats, life in the boreal forest, including the plants, became established on those Laurentide ice sheet landforms, such as this esker that formed from a river that flowed beneath the ice sheet. Our destination area was of interest to me because it lies close to the boundary between the James Bay lowland rocks and the Canadian shield rocks. The area contains interesting geological deposits that cover those rocks, and the area is located at an important ecotone between the James Bay ecoregion, labeled 2E on the map, and the Lake Abitibi ecoregion, labeled 3E on the map. Okay, enough boreal forest in geological context. Let's start the drive north from Kapuskasing to the Kipling Hydroelectric Generating Station, located on the Mattagami River. The road to the Kipling Hydroelectric Generating Station is gravel, but it was in good condition for a gravel road. The first notable geographic feature along the road was the bridge crossing Moosehorn Creek. There were several travel trailers parked at a clearing beside the creek, so I assume there was good fishing in the area. The road passes over lots of sand and gravel. A look at the superficial geology map of the area reveals that the road was located on and follows an esker. An esker is a geological landform that was created by a glacial river that flowed beneath the ice sheet during the last ice age. Eskers are easily recognizable from the air because of their snake or serpentine-like form as they wind across the countryside. Eskers are composed of sand and gravel, so they make an excellent road base, hence the location of the road to Kipling and the abundant sand and gravel that we see in the area. Note also that sandy soil favors the growth of trembling aspen and jack pine trees, which are the dominant tree types in this area. For lunch, we stopped at a pullout beside East Trump Lake, located about 35 kilometers or 20 miles north of Kapuskasing. I saw a sign that indicated the lake was stocked with splake trout. That likely explains the campsite nestled amongst the trees beside the lake. We were also greeted by many Canadian tagger swallowtail butterflies that gathered on the moist silt soil in the pull-off. It turned out that we saw many such gatherings of the swallowtail butterflies that week, more than I had ever seen in my career. Okay, before we leave East Trump Lake area, let me leave you with one more geological observation. This Google Earth satellite image shows many small lakes located along the esker on either side of the road, including East Trump Lake. Geologists call these Kettle Lakes. The Kettle Lakes formed at the end of the last ice age when blocks of ice left behind by a melting and retreating glacier became surrounded by sediment deposited by meltwater. The meltwater filled the depression left by the melted ice block to form a small lake. The shape of a lake generally represents the shape of the stranded ice block. Some are circular, others are irregular in shape. This image shows the superficial geology of the esker, colored in orange, and the Kipling Road, which was constructed on the sandy esker deposits. In this area, the Kettle Lakes formed on the sandy esker deposits. Kettle Lakes are often fed by cold water springs that help keep the lake cold even during a hot summer. This produces an ideal shallow cold lake habitat for some types of fish. So there you go. Geology influences the location of the road that we drive on, and the geological processes created cold water kettle lakes that many people fish in. Okay, let's continue the drive north. As we continue north, the sandy roadside reveals that we're still driving on the esker. Note that the forest here is dominated by trembling aspen. About 45 kilometers, or 28 miles north of Kapuskasing, the access road turns abruptly north and follows the electrical transmission power line. The first part of this road segment still runs along the esker, and trembling aspen trees are abundant. But the forest soon starts its transition from trembling aspen to black and white spruce, indicating that we have left the sandy substrate of the esker and are now driving over land that is covered by wet peat and muck. This change in the geological character of the substrate or soil is shown on this surficial geology map. The pink color represents areas where the Canadian shield rock is very abundant. The teal color represents glacial till consisting of fine-grained silt and clay, with a high matrix of carbonate material derived from the limestone and dolostone rocks of the James Bay lowland, which are located to the north. The till was deposited beneath the ice sheet. The orange color represents the sandy esker deposits formed by a river that flowed beneath the ice sheet, and the blue color represents deposits of silt and clay that formed on the bottom of lakes that formed adjacent to the ice sheet as it started to melt. The cool, wet peat and muck substrate, or soil, is shown in gray color. And finally, the brown color represents modern-day river deposits. This is another nice illustration of the geological influence on forest composition. Sand equals trembling aspen, and mucky stuff more suitable to black spruce. This segment of the road is narrow, wide enough for 2 pickup trucks to pass. There are pullouts located along the sides of the road. Candidly, I would hesitate to drive a 5th-wheel travel trailer on this road, as the pullouts are very short. But we encountered fewer than half a dozen pickup trucks along our travel north, and our tiny trailer is 15 feet long, so we had no issues. Further along the road passes through stands of black spruce, tamarack, and white spruce, accompanied by Labrador tea. These are typical of the cool, moist peat and muck substrate and isolated bog and fen lakes that so characterize this northern part of the road. At the north end of the road, we arrived at the Kipling Hydroelectric Generating Station, which is located on the Mattagami River. This was our geobotanizing destination. Again, the forest is dominated by jack pine and trembling aspen, indicating the sandy nature of the forest substrate. Now, the Kipling Generating Station is one of 4 hydroelectric stations in the lower Mattagami River Hydroelectric Complex. The station is jointly owned by Ontario Power Generation and the Moose Cree First Nation. So this is the Kipling Dam, hydro dam, and it's an unmanned dam. On the Mattagami River. You can see they have protection in the river. They've got this big boom here to keep people from in the water from getting too close, because the water level changes as the electricity needs change, so they can increase or decrease the water flow. Very dangerous to be near the water, of course, when they increase the water flow. This hydro dam is the last of 4 stations located on the lower Mattagami River complex. The Kipling Generating Station was originally commissioned in 1966 and generated 155 megawatts of electricity. In 2015, Ontario Power Generation added a 3rd generating unit to raise the capacity of the Kipling station to 233 megawatts. We camped beside the Mattagami River at what was a popular fishing site. Because this was a weekday and mid-June, there was no one fishing at the time, so it was a quiet night. There was lots of evening light, so we had an opportunity to charge up the trailer batteries using our portable solar panels. Our campsite was also along a portage around the dams. Now, in the summer of 2022, there was a lot of upgrades going on and construction related to the hydroelectric dams. Therefore, there was a strict protocol to ensure the safety of the canoeists. It was a lovely boondocking campsite right beside the Mattagami River. On a less positive note, I confess the site was one of the worst I have experienced in my career because of the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were wicked as soon as the wind dropped in the evening. I have no photos of the experience, but as a geologist, I have camped in many places where the biting insects were really bad. But this camp, beside the Mattagami River, was one of the worst mosquito nights I have experienced in my life. Perhaps I'm getting weak in my old age. However, the mosquitoes were not bad enough to discourage an evening walk through the bush where I came across an old trapline. There's evidence that this is a First Nation person's trapline. And this looks like a marten trap. Looks like an old Connie bear trap. And the box on the tree. I'm not an expert, but my mentors have shown me similar trapping configurations. So I'm guessing it's a marten trap. You might be wondering what animal life we saw along the road. Well, we didn't see very much. Perhaps the most abundant were the Canadian tiger swallowtail butterflies. They were simply everywhere. Also, near the Mattagami River where we camped, I saw one small eastern garter snake that was about 30 centimeters or 1 foot long. We expected to see bear, but all I saw was bear scat and a few bear tracks. I was a little surprised that we didn't see any actual bear. Perhaps the construction related to the upgrades on the dams made the animals more cautious, but I speculate. In closing, I leave you with a few images of the vascular and non-vascular plants I saw in the area around the Kipling generating station. In the next video, I'll discuss the plants with more of a geological context. These are just a few to whet your appetite. Now, if you enjoyed the video, or perhaps learned something new, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Both those simple actions help address the behind-the-scene YouTube algorithm, which in turn helps make others aware of this video. Stay well and see you next time.